Dear students and viewers, Assalamu alaikum. How are you? Hope all of you are fine. Hope all of you are hale and hearty. I am Mahmudul Hassan Masood, lecturer, Department of English, Narsindi Government College, Narsindi. I welcome you to my online class. Dear students, today I am going to take an online class for the students of Honors Third Year, Department of English. Hope all of you will enjoy my class. Let's start our class. Dear students, welcome again to my class. Dear students, as I have mentioned earlier, this class has been designed for the students of Honors Third Year, Department of English. Course title, 16th and 17th Century Poetry. Today's topic is Selected Poems of George Herbert. You can see the image of George Herbert, picture of George Herbert, was born in 1593 and died in 1633. Dear students, you can see this is my first lecture on George Herbert and his poems. Let us see what are the topics I have for you. Topics for discussion: life of George Herbert, style and theme of George Herbert's poetry, and finally I will discuss the poem Easter Wings. Hope you will enjoy my class. George Herbert. Now we will know about George Herbert at a glance. Born April 3, 1593, Montgomery, United Kingdom. Died on 1st of March, 1633, Bemerton, Salisbury, United Kingdom. Spouse, Jane Danvers. Education, Westminster School, Trinity College, and University of Cambridge. Occupation, poet, priest, theologian, orator. His notable works: The Temple, The Country Person, Jacula Prudentum. Style of his writing: metaphysical poetry, theology. So we have known about George Herbert at a glance. Let's see what we have in our next slide. George Herbert. Dear students, now we will know about George Herbert elaborately. Let's see. George Herbert was a Welsh-born poet, orator, and priest of the Church of England. So he was a poet, orator, and priest. He was a Welsh-born poet. His poetry is associated with the writings of the metaphysical poets. I think you are familiar with the term metaphysical poets or metaphysical poetry. And he is recognized as one of the foremost British devotional lyricists. He was born into an artistic and wealthy family and largely raised in England. He received a good education that led to his admission to Trinity College, Cambridge in 1609. He went there with the intention of becoming a priest, but he became the university's public orator and attracted the attention of King James I, and he served in the Parliament of England in 1624 and briefly in 1625. So we can see George Herbert was a metaphysical poet. He was a devotional lyricist He was born into an artistic and wealthy family, but he was largely raised in England, although he was born in Welsh. He received a good education from Trinity College, and he became a familiar figure in England. He attracted the attention of King James I. He then served in the Parliament of England in 1624 and briefly in 1625. So after the death of King James I, Herbert renewed his interest in ordination. So we have known earlier that he wanted to become a priest, but he became a public orator. Then, when King James died, he renewed his interest in ordination, in priesthood. He gave up his secular ambitions in his mid-30s and took holy orders in the Church of England, spending the rest of his life as a rector of the little parish of St. Andrew's Church, Lower Bemerton, Salisbury. He was noted for unfailing care of his parishioners, bringing the sacraments to them when they were ill and providing food and clothing for those in need. Henry Vaughan called him a most glorious saint and seer. He was never a healthy man and died of consumption at the age of 39 only. So dear students, he served as a priest. He was noted for unfailing care for his parishioners. He helped them highly. He provided them food and clothing for those in need. Henry Vaughan, one of the famous poets of English literature, regarded him a most glorious saint and seer. As George Herbert was never a healthy man, he died of consumption only at the age of 39. So dear students, now we'll know about the writing style of George Herbert. His writing style is, he wrote metaphysical poems, and he wrote about theology. Dear students, you know what is metaphysical poetry? Do you know what is metaphysical poetry? Or what do you know about metaphysical poets? Originally, the term metaphysical poetry was coined by John Dryden and later popularized by Samuel Johnson in his book Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets. Metaphysical poets wrote during the early 17th century. You know, what are the main features of the writings of metaphysical poet? Mysticism in content and fantasticality in form. Peculiar conceits, use of peculiar conceits. Metaphysical poets have used metaphysical conceits frequently in their poems, and their expression was very unique way of reasoning and comparison. So these are the features of metaphysical poems. Representative poets of metaphysical poetry. Who are the representative poets of metaphysical poetry? You know, there are some poets who wrote dealing with metaphysics, but among them, John Donne, Andrew Marvell, and George Herbert are the representative poets of metaphysical poetry. And dear students, what is the significance of metaphysical poetry? Metaphysical poetry greatly influenced the modernists of the 20th century. I think you have already known about the subject matter of the metaphysical poetry. Love, death, God, belief, and human frailty are some of the subjects metaphysical poets successfully dealt with. So dear students, our poet George Herbert is a metaphysical poet. He wrote metaphysical poems. And then you can see George Herbert also wrote about theology. We find theology in his poems. What is theology? Theology is the study of religious faith, practice, and experience. Okay, dear students, let us know more about the style and theme of the writings of George Herbert. Herbert's poems have been characterized by a deep religious devotion. You will find deep religious devotion in the poems of George Herbert. And linguistic precision. And linguistic precision will be found in the poems of George Herbert. You will also find metrical agility. Very rhythmical poems he wrote. And ingenious use of conceit. I think you know what is conceit. Metaphysical poets used metaphysical conceits in their poems frequently, very frequently. Conceit is, what is conceit? Conceit is an elaborate or strange metaphor, an ingenious or fanciful comparison or metaphor. Then Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote of Herbert's diction that nothing can be more pure, manly, or unaffected. So his poems, as concerned as diction, very pure, manly, and unaffected, as Samuel Taylor Coleridge mentioned, regarded. And he is ranked with Donne as one of the great metaphysical poets. So these are the style and theme of the writings of George Herbert, poems of George Herbert. Now, dear students, we will know about Easter Wings, a very famous poem of George Herbert. Before going to the main discussion, let us know about the poem Easter Wings. You can see the page of the poem Easter Wings. Easter Wings is a poem by George Herbert which was published in his posthumous collection, The Temple. So we find this poem in his collection, in his book of poem, The Temple. It was originally formatted sideways on facing pages. You can see the picture, facing pages, formatted sideways on facing pages, and is in the tradition of a shaped poems that goes back to ancient Greek sources. So dear students, Easter Wings is an example of shaped poem or patterned poem. And you can see from the picture, the poem is in a pattern, is in a shape. So, and the tradition of the shaped poems goes back to ancient Greek sources. Greek poets actually wrote these pattern or shaped poems. And the later period of time, English poets also imitated them or followed their style. Easter Wings is perhaps George Herbert's most beloved poem. It is famous for its shape. That means the words on the page are arranged like a pair of wings. Actually, if you look at the page very carefully, you will see the words on the page are arranged like a pair of wings. Flight of a bird, flight of the wings of a bird. This is the poem, this is the image of the poem. You can see when it was first published in the book of poems, The Temple. Looks like the wings of a bird. As I have mentioned earlier, it is a pattern poem, it is a shaped poem. Dear students, do you find any similarities between the page and the flight of the wings of the bird? I think you can. As it is a pattern poem or shaped poem, the words are arranged in such a way, seems to be actually on the wings of a bird. Another picture, the page has resemblance like the wings of a bird. That's why it is called a shaped poem or a pattern poem. Another picture for you, dear students, so that you can easily understand, you can easily guess how is it a shaped poem or pattern poem. So these patterns are used by English writers. But long ago, the Greek writers also used different types of shapes, wrote different types of shape poems. So dear students, before going to discuss the poem, let us know what is Easter. You know, Easter, also called Pascha or Resurrection Sunday, is a festival and holiday commemorating the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, as described in the New Testament as having occurred on the third day after his burial, following his crucifixion by the Romans at Calvary in 30 AD. So you can see Easter is a festival in the Christian church commemorating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So Easter Wings is a Easter poem. Dear students, now I am going to explain the poem Easter Wings. At first I'm going to recite the poem for you, then I'll try to explain every line so that you can easily understand the poem. And as you know, Easter Wings is a pattern poem. You can see its two stanzas are shaped like a pair of wings, which mirror the resurrection that is celebrated by Christians during the Easter holiday. Now I'm going to recite the poem first, then I will explain every line to you. Easter Wings by George Herbert. Lord, who createst man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost to the same, decaying more and more, till he became most poor. with thee. Oh, let me rise as larks harmoniously and sing this day thy victories. Then shall the fall further the flight in me. My tender age in sorrow did begin, and still with sickness and shame thou didst so punish sin, that I became most thin. With thee let me combine and feel thy victory. For if I aim to my wing on thine, affliction shall advance the flight in me. Student, this is the poem. Very rhythmical poem, you can see. Now I am going to explain you the poem. The students, as you can see, there are two stanzas in the poem. Each stanza of the poem is shaped like a wing. Dear students, now I am going to explain the poem to you so that you can easily get inner meaning of the poem. Let's start. Lord, who createst man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more, till he became most poor. Here, the speaker begins the poem by stating that God created human beings to enjoy peace and abundance. However, humans lost this initial paradise due to sin. Their situation became worse and worse day by day. Then the speaker addresses God directly. With thee, oh, let me rise as larks harmoniously. Then the speaker addresses God directly and asks to rise up to sky like a lark and sing this day thy victories. Then shall the fall further the flight in me. As an Easter poem, the image of birds and wings symbolizes Christ's resurrection. Then the speaker then calls for humanity to join Christ and celebrate the victory of resurrection over death. If they can succeed in this, then even the fall, that means the expulsion from paradise because of sin, due to sin, will have been worth it, because it allowed believers to rise with Christ. So here we find the biblical story of the first sin of man and his consequent fall from the blissful Eden, Garden of Heaven, due to Satan's temptation, and lost his spiritual quality because of his own folly. This refers to his original sin committed by Adam and Eve by violating God's command not to eat the fruit of the forbidden tree of knowledge under temptation of Satan. But the speaker calls for humanity on Easter to join Christ and celebrate the victory of resurrection over death. And if they can succeed in this, then the fall from heaven, fall from paradise will have been worth it, because it allowed believers to rise with Christ. Then go to the next stanza, second stanza. My tender age in sorrow did begin, and still with sickness and shame. The second stanza tells a similar story from the perspective of the individual speaker. From the perspective of individual speaker. Mind it. Even at the young age, He suffered, the speaker suffered much. Thou didst so punish sin, then I became most thin. The speaker says, this was a punishment given by God, just like the punishment given to Adam and Eve. The speaker's life became increasingly diminished and his health began to suffer, still with sickness and shame. This is the punishment from God to the speaker, to individual speaker. The speaker thinks so. As in the first stanza, halfway through, the speaker begins to address God directly. He asks to feel the victory of the resurrection and join God, using the now metaphor of imping. Let me combine and feel thy victory. Like in the first stanza, here also we find the speaker begins to address God directly. He asks to feel the victory of resurrection and feel thy victory. Let me combine and feel thy victory. For if I imp my wing on thine, he wants to join God. Using the metaphor of imping, a term from falconry that means adding feathers to an existing wing, the speaker asks to rise with Christ to the kingdom of heaven. An affliction shall advance the flight in me. If he succeeds doing so, rising with Christ to kingdom of heaven, it is because of the great lows and pains he suffered taught him how to fly. Affliction that shall advance the flight in me. So, dear students, you can see it's a Easter poem. First stanza tells the situation of human being in general, and then second stanza tells the story from perspective of the individual speaker. Both the human beings and individual speakers wants to join God, but how? They want to rise with Christ to the kingdom of heaven. So there are some glossary for you. Wealth. Your wealth means spiritual health, blessing, felicity, abundance, prosperity. Store, sufficient or abundant supply of something needful, plenty, abundance. A stock of anything material or immaterial laid up for future use. To further, to help forward, assist things or persons, to promote, favor, and action and movement. Tender, adjective, young, having the weakness and delicacy of youth. To him, to repair the wing of a falcon by tying on a feather from another bird. Affliction, the act of inflicting pain, part of religious self-discipline. Misery or distress, a thing that causes pain, misery, or distress, a disease or illness. So these are the words for you so that you can easily understand the poem. Summary. Let us see the summary. You can see the speaker begins the poem by stating that God created human beings to enjoy peace and abundance in paradise. However, humans lost his initial paradise due to sin. Their situation became worse and worse. Then the speaker addresses God directly and asks to rise up to the sky like lark. You know, lark is a bird that soars up and up. As an Easter poem, the image of birds and wings symbolizes Christ's resurrection. The speaker then calls for humanity to join Christ and celebrate the victory of resurrection over death. As it is an Easter poem, you know. If they can succeed in this, then even the fall from paradise, expulsion from paradise due to sin. Here you can find the biblical story of the first sin of man and his consequent fall from the blissful Eden, Garden of Heaven, due to Satan's temptation. And now man lost his spiritual quality because of his own folly. And the expulsion from paradise due to sin will have been worth it because it allowed believers to rise with Christ on Easter. The second stanza tells a similar story from the perspective of the individual speaker. Even at a young age, the speaker had suffered. He suffered with sickness. This was a punishment given by God, just like the punishment given to Adam and Eve when they committed the sin by violating God's command not to eat the fruit of the forbidden tree of knowledge under temptation of Satan. The speaker's life became increasingly diminished and his health began to suffer. As in the first stanza, halfway through, the speaker begins to address God directly. He asks to feel the victory of the resurrection and join God using the metaphor of imping. Imping is a term from falconry that means adding feathers to an existing wing. The speaker asks to rise with Christ to the kingdom of heaven. If he succeeds to rise with Christ to the kingdom of heaven, if it because of the great loss and pains he suffered taught him how to fly, because of his pains that he undergone, that taught him to fly like human beings, they are also suffering. So dear students, now I am going to tell you about the theme of the poem. Do you know what is theme or themes? In literature, theme refers to the central or dominating idea, the message implicit in a work, literary work. We can also say theme is the central idea of a literary work, most often suggested indirectly. So what are the themes of the poem? Felix culpa is a theme. A major theme of the poem is the theological concept of Felix culpa, or the fortunate fall. Fortunate fall. Felix culpa means fortunate fall. Felix means happy, lucky, fortunate. Culpa means fall. Means fall. The idea is that mankind's fall, caused by Adam and Eve's eating of the tree of knowledge, eating of the tree of knowledge, was actually fortunate in that it made the resurrection possible. There are brighter things. Without the fall, Christ would not have come to earth to redeem mankind. He thinks. In this sense, the power works to justify pain. The poem works to justify pain, suffering, and illness as necessary experiences. Another theme, resurrection. The poem discusses resurrection both in the sense of Christ rising from the dead, but also in terms of humanity's overcoming of sin. The theme of resurrection is expressed through metaphors related to wings, birds, flying, and heights. And parallel histories is another theme. Easter Wings tells three stories at once. Three stories. It describes mankind's happy creation, its descent into sin, and its redemption through Christ from Christian belief. It also describes the speaker's own process moving from birth to pain to redemption. Both of these narratives mirror Christ's own narrative. The poem suggests that divine and earthly history mirror each other. So dear students, now I'm going to tell you about the symbols used in the poem. First one is, do you know what is symbol? Symbols actually are words or phrases that stands for something else. Let's see what are the symbols used in the poem. Wings. Because wings is a symbol here, because wings are associated with birds and angels. They symbolize the heavens. In this poem, in particular, wings are a symbol of spiritual heights. The speaker wants to become a feather on God's wing. This means that his faith in God will carry him to redemption. Another theme is lark, bird. The lark has multiple meanings. It is a herald of dawn and by extension rebirth. It is a bird known for its musical song, so it is a symbol of the poet. Also, bird wings bring to mind the flight of angels. Bird wings bring to mind the flight of angels, thereby symbolizing Christ's ascension. Another theme is wealth and poverty. In the poem, wealth and store do not simply describe money and goods, but are symbols for spiritual richness. Similarly, being poor and thin, these are archaic words, poor and thin, refer both to financial and physical states, but also the spiritual consequences of sin. Now, we will know about the motif of the poem. Do you know what is motif or motifs? Motif is any recurring element that has symbolic significance in a story or in a poem, achieved through imagery, language, structure, or other stylistic choices made by an author or poet. So let's see the motifs. Growth and decay is a motif. Both the content and form of the poem play off the motif of a cycle of growth and decay. The poem starts with wealth and becomes poor, reflected in the shorter lines. It reaches the lowest depths and then rises up. See the structure of the poem. Besides describing humanity's spiritual state moving from death to resurrection, this cycle of growth and decay also suggests the movement of the seasons from cold to warm and back again. As an Easter poem, the poem draws attention to the position of the holiday in the cycle of the seasons. Spring falls in between winter with its short days and summer with its long days. So, allegory. Dear students, this is an allegorical poem. What is an allegory? I'm giving you the definition of allegory. Allegory is a story or poem which can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political meaning, political one. Hidden moral or political meaning. So we can see allegory is a story or poem which can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, inner meaning. Typically, the meaning will be moral or political. How is a poem an allegorical poem? Because it tells the life of mankind. In this poem, The story of an individual life from birth to sin to redemption is an allegory both for the spiritual life of mankind, that is from paradise to the fall, then to redemption, and for the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. So dear students, thank you very much for watching me, for joining in my class. I think from my class you have understood the poem Easter Wings very well, and I have tried to tell you the theme, the allegory, the motifs, the symbols of that are used in the poems. I have also tried to say about life of George Herbert. I have tried to tell you about the writing style of George Herbert. I have told you about the themes used in the poems of George Herbert. And I'm going to take 2 or 3 classes on George Herbert, and I hope you will join in my next classes also. And in my next class, in my lecture 2, I'm going to tell you the literary elements used in the poem Easter Wings. And if possible, I'll discuss the poem, the color. And of course, in my next classes, I'll give you some questions so that you can study at home. So dear students, thank you. Thank you very much.